Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. This is Sterigenics story. We've been covering it all week. Been covering it in one of the outlets I started, DuPagePolicyJournal.com. Stories talking to actual scientists to explain what the EPA has done with the scare they induced, amplified by the Chicago Press Corps in the Willowbrook, Darien, Hinsdale, Burr Ridge area over this company, Sterigenics, that sterilizes medical devices and medical equipment, life-saving medical devices and medical equipment. And now further amplified by bottom-feeding, fear-mongering for-profit trial lawyers whose billboards you see on the expressways who are on the precipice of filing suit.
Yeah, they're doing it today, actually, in court, and people claiming that 15 women got breast cancer who live around the plant. And bladder cancer. And, just to provide some counterbalance and some context and consequence to the evidence-free report that begot all of this fear in these communities and the complete lack of accountability either demanded by the Chicago Press Corps or offered up by EPA and CDC. Yesterday, they had another community forum in Willowbrook, with more abstract platitudes about what their general concerns are about cancer-causing agents and so forth. Yeah, they said they'll get back to them. We'll get back to you on the results.
It's perfect.
It's unbelievable. Why even have the meeting?
They know their audience in this state. They know their audience. What's the three-pronged answer for Democrat socialists to every problem, particularly those they've created? Not as bad as you think. Plenty of blame to go around, and we're working on it. Yeah. There it is. That's what you get with every single government commissar, every single Democrat socialist Paul in charge of this city, region, state. That's what you get. Here's what residents had to say after the community forum. We sent one of our reporters there because, of course, you can't count on the quote-unquote established organs of the press in Chicago.
I think they've damaged their own reputation in our community, absolutely. I mean, this is my first time really, seeing this kind of interaction and dealing with an issue. And I would say that, number one, their reputation is damaged. Number two is, this report, I would be very cautious to say that, if the report is factual, and the information is important, then it has to be shared, even if it has some kind of effect on the community, because this is a public safety issue. So you can't repress that information, if it's out there. I just am shocked that it's taken 30 years.
It's taken 30 years because the Sterigenics facility in Willowbrook has been there since 1984, and now all of a sudden it is an existential threat to public health. Unfortunately, the actual data taken, not the modeling based on census tracts, suggests something very different. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Rich Trzupek. He's an environmental advisor to the Heartland Institute, free market think tank here in suburban Chicago with national focus. Richard, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So give us your top line on everything that has transpired over the last week to 10 days with where we were in the fall on Sterigenics and the possibility of heightened levels of ethylene oxide in the atmosphere, thus inducing more likelihood of cancer. This was essentially what CDC and EPA said, to where we are now as the EPA very gently walks back their previous pronouncements.
This modeling that precipitated all this was done as part of a program called the National Air Toxics Assessment, which looks at risk from air toxics from hundreds of chemicals, not just ethylene oxide. And one of the things they specifically say in the National Air Toxics Assessment is do not use this to pinpoint specific risk values in small areas such as a census tract. That's a direct quote from the NATA website. This is all nonsense. It's picking on one particular air toxic that is part of an assessment of hundreds of air toxics.
Well, how does the EPA make residents feel better? I mean, the people of Willowbrook are
They
really...
don't want to.
Well, they're suffering emotionally, and they have no answers, and they don't know if the air they're breathing is really safe.
The air they're breathing is fine. And I don't know how U.S. EPA walks us back. I am very proud, though, of Illinois EPA, even though I'm always on the opposite side of the desk from them, that they have refused to give in to the hysteria. Illinois EPA has stood firm. They have refused to refer this to the Attorney General. They know this is nonsense. How U.S. EPA fixes that, I don't know how they do it.
Just on the issue of air quality, because, you still have people repeating the same doom and gloom reporting that they've read in the Tribune or heard from, trial lawyers passing their business cards out. The Sterigenics statement, now this is coming from Sterigenics, so of course people will treat it with skepticism, as they should. They should treat every pronouncement with skepticism, but on the merits,
absolutely.
On the merits, you as a scientist, Sterigenics says, look, we commissioned an independent scientific testing firm to measure EO levels across Chicagoland, from the Loop to Guaranteed Rate Park to the northern, southern, western burbs. The results are not surprising, according to them, given that ethylene oxide is produced by many sources. The EO levels in the air around Willowbrook and across Chicagoland are very small. They are not zero because of the multitude of natural man-made sources that produce EO, but the air in Willowbrook and Darien and Hinsdale and Burr Ridge is no different than, effectively, at least as it pertains to the issue, the Loop or the northern or southern or western burbs. That's what Sterigenics is claiming. Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair, because what has been said by the press and self-serving politicians and lawyers is that what is called a reference value, 0.005 micrograms per cubic meter, is somehow related to causing cancer, and that's not what reference values are about. And everywhere that you measure, you're going to get numbers well in excess of that 0.005. That's an impossible value to hit, and it has nothing to do with public health risk.
Sterigenics goes on to say, look, we've spent millions of dollars voluntarily in emissions control systems and processes to ensure public safety. We convert more than 99% of the EO, ethylene oxide, used at the Willowbrook facility is captured and controlled before it's converted for safe reuse. In other words, they write less than 0.1% of EO used is released into the atmosphere. And so how does that compare by both industry standards and legal standards?
That's meeting the requirement of the federal rule that governs emissions of ethylene oxide from sterilization facilities. And it's absolutely true. It's in ethylene oxide as a toxin compared to all the other air toxics that are released is really a very minor player.
Do you know why the U.S. EPA chose that plant in that community as opposed to any other plant that has EO emissions?
Well, it's not. I don't know why they chose it, but they periodically do these surveys as part of the National Air Toxic Assessment process in different places. And it's not so much that they chose it, it's that it got such press. So my question is, why did this particular survey, out of the hundreds and thousands of surveys EPA did, strike such attention? That's my question.
And now you have source material for more scaremongering journalism with respect to these lawsuits being filed, and people claiming that the cancer that they or a family member has been afflicted with is the result of Sterigenics and their release of ethylene oxide into the air. I mean, is there any way to connect those dots?
No, there's not, because, again, the air toxic assessment involves hundreds of chemicals that are potential carcinogens in very, very small doses. And to isolate one is about as unscientific as you can get.
Well, I know a lot of residents and, even Jim Tomey's wife, they want the plant shut down. Would that happen? Could that happen?
I sure hope not, because as Dan said, they're doing a great thing. They're keeping medical devices safe. They're one of thousands of such facilities across the country that do that, and they're doing it responsibly. And I have no ties to them, but I really hope it doesn't come to that.
No, I don't have any ties to them either. I've never even heard of them until this thing became public. But what about the suits being filed against Sterigenics by both DuPage County and the you mentioned EPA didn't refer it to the Attorney General's office, but Lisa Madigan didn't need the referral. She's pursuing it anyway. There any merit to the lawsuits being filed by units of government with respect to Sterigenics and the operation of their business?
Well, unless we get to the point in this country where following all of your permit requirements and all the applicable regulation requirements doesn't matter, I don't see how those suits have any value at all.
And you mentioned, I'm sorry, I want to get your, since you were the source material on this too, even if the EPA's model was right about the presence of ethylene oxide in the air, it's not based on actual testing, but even if it was right, you offered a comment on the topic of what that risk would be if the EPA's modeling was correct, and what is that?
That risk is insignificant compared to, again, if you put it in the context of all the other risks that are insignificant. The worst risk that most of us ever face is from our backyard barbecue. The smoke from your backyard barbecue contains more air toxins than you could believe, and I have no problem with it because your exposure is so limited and it's so small. But if you put things in an apples to apples comparison, that's the one that most of us are most exposed to.
That's great. Richard Trzupek, environmental advisor to the Heartland Institute. Thanks so much for joining us, providing your expertise. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.